All right. Hi, everyone. This is Jess, and I'm with Luke, and we are here again. He's between two ferns. Well, between a fern and some kind of, I
Wax
don't know,
leaf.
wax leaf, between a fern and a wax leaf. And I'm in the infinite void of the white space. Um, I know we were chatting about postmodernism in the Discord, and so I have something I just want to start out with. And I posted a video of N.T. Wright. It was just a short blurb of him talking about the role of postmodernism from his point of view. And I thought this could be kind of a jumping off point. And this, I'll even tie in Estuary a bit. So the quote he said was that postmodernism is announcing the doctrine of the fall to an arrogant modernity. So modernity came along and said, all right, we've got this figured out. This is the Enlightenment. We've got it figured out. It's about reason. We need everyone on board, everyone get alongside of us. If we all act in this way, we've unlocked the secrets of the universe. And so modernity runs this course. And I think, like Paul mentioned in one of his latest videos, is that this starts to fall apart about World War I, when and N.T. Wright mentions that there was an earthquake in Lisbon in the 1700s that really kind of set back the Enlightenment idea, because the world starts to come apart from God becomes separate from the material world, and we just are unlocking the material world with our reason and our science. And God is like a watchmaker that kind of made this really intricate, delicate machine and started it and just sort of released it. And then, but then there's these horrible catastrophes. So N.T. Wright mentions the earthquake in Lisbon, which I didn't know about, but it apparently happened on a Sunday. So everyone's in churches and the churches collapse on people. The people that run out to the outside, they notice the ocean is pulled back, and then they're wondering what's going on. And well, it's a tidal wave, and the wave comes in, and whoever wasn't killed in the churches that were collapsed gets swept out to sea and drown. And then World War I comes, at the beginning of the 20th century, and basically shows that nobody understands nobody understands what we're doing, and how can this catastrophe happen? Aren't we all operating by reason? And this is Europe. This is the most reasonable, enlightened people on the earth, and they get embroiled in the bloodiest, most meaningless conflict there has ever been with all this technology they built. So then we have World War II, and we're into postmodernism as a thing into the 50s, 60s, and up into present day. So basically, modernity was arrogant and thought it could control everything and unlock the secrets of the world. Postmodernism announces the doctrine of the fall, so that no, we're all fallen. And I think this even happens. I was thinking about Freud, just the discovery that there's the unconscious. Like, it's just a huge blow to the whole Enlightenment project, that there's these unconscious things that are happening that can control you. And Freud tries to systematize it and try to modernize it, basically, to make it not so risky, and just be like, oh, we got to deal with this stuff. Like, let's be aware of it. Let's deal with it. Your all these drives and desires. And Jung, I think rightly, was like, no, this thing's a lot deeper than you think. And I think, and Jung predicts, has that vision that basically predicts World War I, where he has the vision of Europe being drenched in blood. And anyone at the time would be like, what are you talking about? This is the most peaceful, this is the highest point of history. How would we ever get into a war? And we still don't know why World War I started. That's one of the craziest things. We still don't really know. I mean, we know the causal factors. There's the Archduke gets assassinated and that stuff, and chain reactions happen. But it was all very from a rationalist point of view, is all very silly. And then the war itself was so bloody, it couldn't even be considered heroic to have died in World War I. It was an absolute catastrophe. Okay, so anyway, so postmodernism announces the doctrine of the fall to the arrogant modernity. So this gets me to my U-shaped structure I talked about. So you can picture, so this is the what Pajot talks about. This is the pattern of everything. Everything has this U-shaped structure. So you have, paradise, the fall, and then the redemption. So in our example, we'll have, modernity's over here. It fell. Postmodernity is preaching to modernity. You have fallen, and that's why it's deconstruction. That's why it's fracturing. That's why it's all the negative things people say about postmodernism. It's actually just, I think it's interesting to think about it in the terms of the doctrine of the fall. Okay, so now we're at the bottom, that in my other video I called Deconstruction Valley for me personally, but as a society, the Enlightenment happened, it's fallen, we're now at the bottom, and N.T. Wright says at the end of that clip is we have to move on somehow toward redemption, because that's the story. Paradise, the fall, redemption. And the redemption, in the Christian story is always more glorious. It's a more glorious place than what was previous. So you have the garden at the beginning of the Bible, at the end of the Bible, you have the glorious city, with the still more with garden around it and stuff. So if we're at the bottom of this, this fracturing, this delusion, where everything's divided and confused and upside down and flipping, there's a lot of John and Pajot talking about things that are on the edge. And I wonder if Estuary is the type, because what has to come in the middle of that to be able to enable the resurrection or the restoration or the redemption is the Logos. So Christ has to come. So in terms of an Estuary type situation, like if we're engaging with each other in dialogue, this is the John Vervaeke dialogos thing. We're trying to enact some sort of process that where the Logos can be manifest somehow. And it's not necessarily clear how to do that. All we know is that if you one or two or three gather in his name, he'll be there. So, because you have to move forward and you can't go back to modernity. Modernity's done. The Enlightenment might be done. All the rational scientism's done. We're done with that. How do we go forward? We don't just ignore science. We're not. See, that's where Antifa and a lot of the more Marxist elements, they get it wrong. They think, everything's going down, we should just burn the whole thing down. We need to destroy absolutely everything. That's not what we need to do. Of course, I don't think there'll be much argument. We have to move forward somehow, and we got to integrate the past with the current situation and into something that's livable moving forward. Because modernity's done, but we still need it to survive for the next however long this takes. We'll need elements of modernity to get us along as we stair step this thing up. It's like at any change, there's you never like have a clean break. You're like, this was the ancient world, now we're in the modern world. The ancient world's still trickling through after the Enlightenment, and then eventually it dies off. And then, so we're in this phase where modernity is dying, and we have to figure out how to move forward. And I think we need the Logos, we need Christ, and how to engage that and the only thing practically I know, or one thing practically I know what to do, is engage in discussions and talk about it. so we know how to move forward.
Right. Um, so, are you familiar with spiral dynamics? I'm sure you are.
No.
Oh, you're not? Okay. Well, this
Uh,
is
Teach
all the
me.
circles that you've traveled in. This is something they talk about all the time, very often. So Richard Rohr is really big into spiral dynamics. Ken Wilber. Um,
Oh, is that where you work your way up in
yeah.
a circle? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I know what you mean.
I think it works both on the individual level and on the collective level, but what I like about it is it's not a dualistic frame. It's a tertiary
Three-dimensional.
kind of three-dimensional thing. And so it kind of incorporates whatever that T.S. Eliot quote of like, the person will end up back where they started, after all their wanderings kind of a thing. Or
But they'll be higher.
right, but well, that's I think the dynamic that spiral dynamics adds in
Mhm.
is that it's kind of like I've talked about this with Joe before, but I don't know if it's a Zen saying, but it's kind of like before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Um, and um, and I think that's true. It's not that our world changes, but I mean, that gets into Barfield too, and even like the his idea of original participation, final participation. Or Charles Taylor, porous selves, buffered selves. What's next? What is this final participation thing that we're moving toward? And like, so there's a couple things Paul says, like he's talked about the death and modernity recently quite a bit, and secularity, and that these things take a really long time. And I think that's true. There's a trickle down effect with all these things. So like there a lot of times there I've postulated before there's three different kinds of thinkers. There's kind of like the vanguard trailblazers, shamans that are just like really out there on the fringe seeing stuff that nobody's thinking, but they don't even know how to say it.
Yeah.
So out there, and they're kind of mystics, poets, those types of people, and they're trying to reach out into that, you know, um,
Unknown.
ephemeral, just unknown, and bring it down to some degree. And it's really hard to do, but it takes there's a trickle down with that because before those things become commonplace and kind of the broader collective consciousness, it could take a long, long time. And I think
Yeah.
we're constantly in kind of that cycle, which I think is speaking to the spiral dynamics and this constant. It is a, it is in a sense almost like a progressivist way of understanding evolution consciousness. Like it's moving something. There's a telos to it.
Hmm.
Further up and further in is what you could say it, but yet it's circling around this and never touching this kind of
Center.
mystical center.
Yeah.
And I think where we're at now, and that's somewhat of a U-shaped trajectory, or like Richard Rohr talks about, order, disorder, reorder, and that you could think of that as like really. I was recently listening to Pete Rollins, like the Oedipus complex. You're
Yeah.
part of the oceanic oneness in the mother. You're actually in her. You're connected to her through an umbilical cord, and then you're outside her body and you're woken up to this thing, and it's shocking and it's traumatic, but it's pre-conscious almost. You're not even an individual yet. And then you're attached to her breast, and then slowly and slowly there's degrees of separation, and then you're kind of like hiding behind her skirt. You're scared, you don't look at other, and then all of a sudden, like throughout the course of a child's life, up until whatever they're 25, it varies. They're not really an individual, and even then it's kind of like the whole process of the faith of the father becoming the child's faith or not. Like there's this whole somewhat your father, this or your parents, your god figures, all of a sudden you realize too, like they're not these just like godlike people. They're fallen and broken, and there's this whole psychology that happens. And I think it's the fractal nature of reality, and this is why like the family is, I don't know. I love thinking a lot about the family because I think it's reflective of everything. Um, and so all of that to say is, I think what is happening right now through the death of modernity is, and this gets into a little bit of what I kind of want to talk about. I think it's tied into this, is that I think postmodernity is the, like the N.T. Wright quote, is the critique of you're not acknowledging the fall. But where I would say that we're at right now is like a lot of this postmodern thinking came in, I mean, I don't know, 100 years ago, you know, starting, and but then it
Was
really
it
got,
was it that long ago?
well, I mean, I think it was the beginnings of it, but it was
Yeah.
more, you know, it was more in like the latter part of the 20th century,
It's like
probably.
40s, 50s before anything significant.
Right. And then, but I don't think, where I think we're at right now, and this is kind of what, um, like, I've talked to you a little bit about, and what I want to get into is that I don't think broadly people really have taken postmodernism seriously. We are still interacting with postmodernity largely in a modernist way.
Oh yeah, even this conversation is kind of a modernist way of talking about it.
Right, because it's an overly systematizing of all these categories, but it's, I don't know, one of the easiest ways for me to understand it would almost be like an Ian McGilchrist right brain, left brain
Yeah.
math territory, is that even, and honestly, this has always been one of my biggest concerns, not only for the Paul Vanderklay community, but for the IDW and all these people, and why I like Jordan Peterson so much, is Jordan Peterson is, um, he's inherently, I think, a mystic. Um, what is that? But he, which is why I trust him, is because Jordan Peterson, I think, for all the things that he says, and I think you can find clips of him talking about postmodernity in a very simplistic way and just saying it's a guise, it didn't work, and then it's a guise for Marxism. But I think if you could sit down with Jordan Peterson and have a longer conversation with him, particularly with like the kind of postmodernist that I think knows what he's talking about, is honest, which the only one I can really think of in my mind is Rollins. Like Rollins is
Well,
kind of
he
the,
had that conversation with Zizek that was interesting
that
because
wasn't
it took him for a surprise, both from yeah, just because he was expecting some sort of caricature.
right, or and this is the thing, this that gets into my, like what I've been saying recently, the differentiation between what I call the mofo pomo
Yeah,
and,
define that because that came up a couple.
well, to me, so Julian wrote an article after the last Vervaeke Peugeot Paul Vanderklay talk, and he in it, which I don't, I'd like to read the larger article. There was a quote from David Bentley Hart that he said, most postmodernity isn't really postmodernity, it's really late stage modernism. And so it's people that are using the name, the label, the word, the suitcase postmodernity to achieve, they're using it in a very modernist, tribalistic, dualistic way to win. Like postmodernity that has become the new meta narrative, that there is no meta narrative. And
Mm-hmm.
so like we're just going to throw everything into chaos. Like that's not, I don't think that's authentic postmodernity. That's a veiled late stage modernist play trying to just have a trump card against all the other modernists. It's
Yeah,
still completely within the realm of like control. What I would see, and this gets into what I think, and I don't know this well enough, and I probably will never read Derrida to the point of really getting at this. But my intuition say, and I'll just say this is just intuition, is that what Derrida was critiquing when he talked about logocentrism or foul logocentrism was the binary static usage of language, where language is merely a tool in the sense of like, I'll pull in another piece like Jacques Ellul, La Technique, where you thereby use language to manipulate and control your environment to achieve your previously assumed and oriented ends.
mm-hmm.
But that's not
It's
a,
manipulative.
it's inherently manipulative and controlling, and it's not language. To me, this gets into, like, I'll bring in Marshall McLuhan, is like when language has become divorced from its, when language is used as a technique, when it's used technologically, when it's used as a tool, you divorce it from the ineffable, from its transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
You actually divorce it from logos. And so interestingly, I think what is happening, this is where everything's so U-shaped, and God works everywhere. Like, where can I escape from your presence, oh Lord? You know, if I ascend to the heights, you're there. If I go to the depths, you're there. You can't escape.
Right.
That even in deconstruction, even in the abyss, even in Hades, God is there. And so even in, you can't get away from him. Like, he defeats death by death. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you can't get away from God. And so even in all this craziness, so even though I see all these errors with technology, or what I would say the spirit of, somewhat the spirit of even schismatic ideological Protestantism, is that God is working through that to bring about reorder and redemption. And so what my hope is that, because where has all the life and the hope? I would just ask you this question. I mean, I think I have an answer. But the last few years, all the signs of life and hope, and like the glimmers of reorder and defending the chaos, has happened how? I would say it's happened through long form discussion that has happened through YouTube and
Mm-hmm.
podcasts.
Yep.
But that is the use of technology, not through just like writing and back and forth blogging, casting stones, or just having a monologue talking point where, like Ben Shapiro. It's conversations
Yeah.
with people that you disagree, where you can't. It's language as it's language not divorced from the breath. It's live. It's real. It's where two or more are gathered.
Yep. That's
So
Vervaeke's dialogos, which is the, like, you don't have an end goal, but you think you have the hope going into a conversation that something will emerge that will be greater than what you could have planned
yeah,
going in.
you have an end goal. This is where I bring in that Peugeot clip or whatever, where it's caged as a disagreement between him and Jordan Peterson. But I think if you had Jordan Peterson live, he wouldn't disagree that truth is nestled in love. Love is superior to truth, and it has to
Yeah.
be, because it's transcendent. It's
Mm-hmm.
love is universal, whereas our apprehension, at least, of truth in an articulable way can never transcend love. It's impossible. It
Yeah.
always must be subject to love. And I think when you're having a dialogos conversation and modeling, not even modeling, but just participating in agape,
Mm-hmm.
um, you relinquish that control. And this is where I get into like aspects of universalism. And I'm not talking about like salvation necessarily broadly. Like, I'm not trying to make a
But
doctrinal.
that everything's redeemed.
It's in, when you do that, like I would quote St. John, like, those that love know God. Like, it's just, if you love, you know God. There's just, you can't you can't you can't love and not be participating in God. I mean, it's not even possible.
Is that like opposed? When I think of that, I think of it as opposed to having like the right belief system in my head. Like, I believe that Jesus died and rose from the dead, and uh, and that I confess my sins, and like having that knowledge, as opposed to like acting in a way as if that was true in love, which is love.
Right, which interestingly, like, this is that's Jordan Peterson's whole act as if,
Yeah.
versus just like saying whatever. And he's like, anybody can say anything. Who the hell do you know? You don't know what you believe. So the act as if thing. But what is interesting is, like, that came up in the Douglas Murray. I and I screenshot, or I wrote it in the promos discussion, and I put it in like the YouTube comments under the video. But like, Murray said something like, uh, he said everybody is talking and saying all this stuff, but he's like, now we're getting to the point where the rubber meets the road and people are acting on
Mm-hmm.
these things, because that's what it means. Where the rubber meets the road is where it gets real, where you actually do it, when it ceases to be. But I think this has been the problem with all of the problem with talking about all this stuff abstractly, like even the conversation we're having now, is that it's still in a late stage modernity thing. Like it doesn't matter until you act on it. So like even if everything that we're saying is true, it's somewhat irrelevant unless we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the problem that I think happens, which is I think why Paul likes to talk to randos so much, is because, and why I think Paul's channel has been as successful as it is, but why it hasn't blown up is like to the degree that a Ben Shapiro or something like that blows up, is because that kind of exponential growth, this gets into my technological babble stuff. Like it's the difference between like machine replication is exponential. You
Yeah.
can do it extremely fast and extremely quick, but I would argue that that spirit is the same thing that happens with like like a social media growth. Like if you have a YouTube account that just grows like that, I would almost inherently mistrust it.
Right.
I would say like there's no way that that can be like I would almost say that it has to be within the world of ideology and language as technique,
Mm-hmm.
because ideological possession is the only thing that moves that fast. And
Well, Joe Rogan's he's a he doesn't do that. His channel's popular because of the conversation, right?
right, but it was slow too. Like that happened
Yeah.
over. Um,
A decade? Has
I
he
mean,
been doing it a decade?
yeah, it's gotten bigger now. But even with Jordan Peterson, like I think Jordan Peterson, around him initially, a lot of people coalesced that I think that were participating in the right spirit. But then I would argue, like all of a sudden, when it really boomed, there were a bunch of just like ideological sycophants that thought Jordan Peterson was going to come in and be their new Messiah. I mean, it reminds me of Jesus, to be their new Messiah, to like, when are you going to redeem Israel? Like, when are you going to do the thing that we expect you to do? When are you going to be my means to get to my utopian vision?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is like, never. Like, never. That's not what I'm doing. That's the way of the world.
So you said Peterson's he was participating in, or you said people were getting around and that participated in that spirit. What is that spirit that he's doing? Because I almost think it's that kind of dialogos thing, only he was almost doing it within himself. Like, because he was taking the mythological and the psychological and the religious, and he was having all those things work themselves out in love somehow.
Right. Have
They're
you
not in competition with each other.
right? Have you heard Peterson ever talk about? I think he's talked about like psychological splitting, and he says sometimes people, in order to think, they almost have to talk to somebody
You
else.
think he did that?
But he said that he
Yeah.
I think he explicitly said that in one of his things, that he says in his whatever enlightenment, or like what start when people ask him how he started his journey and where he got to where he was, he said, I think it was like in his early 20s or late teens or something, he had a realization that most of what he said wasn't true,
Mm-hmm.
and that he was either just like trying to win a debate or win arguments or whatever. And he's like, what? And he all of a sudden he had something where he said, why are you doing that? Like, why are you saying that right now? And he realized what he was doing. But inherently, to do that, you have to have a splitting. You have to have
Yeah.
some
You
distance.
watch yourself.
Yeah, and you watch yourself. And he was like, what is that? And I don't like that. And then he said he did that to such a degree that it was almost such a stark split
He
that he
stopped
had,
talking. He
yeah,
stopped saying things.
he had the realization that like I think he said like 98% of himself was false, and he's like, that's a lot of dead wood to burn off. And he said that's scary, because then what's going to be left?
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and I think a little bit that's where we're at now, and I think it's happening individually and collectively, and I think that's what's happening through what I would call honest deconstruction, not like the tribalist post-evangelical, ex-evangelical, like I'm posting about it on social media all day and I'm
Yeah.
bitter.
There's that weird kind of like social hierarchy of how well you're deconstructing and who did the, yeah.
Well, I would say, like, are you, but this is through the spirit. Like, in your deconstruction, are you bitter and vengeful and you're not actually looking for any sort of like redemptive arc, but you're just like, you've just moved to your new tribal identity and you're shitting on the thing that you left?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I would argue like you're a mofo pomo. You're not actually deconstructing. You're not actually doing the earnest deconstruction.
Doing the opposite.
You're just mad and you're just doing modernism again.
Yeah, man, Gerard keeps coming to mind. I had like a week or two where I just listened to Gerard talk about his mimetic theory. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, Gerard is one of my like he's on my Mount Rushmore of the meaning crisis.
Yeah, but even that idea that like because it's not just that you copy someone else or you mine them. You can actually like usually when people are in conflict it's because one person does something and the other person decides they're going to do the opposite or take the opposite stance, but they're doing the same they're participating in the same spirit basically.
Yeah. Yes.
And the same thing with like a lot of the deconstructionists they were, they were fundamentalist evangelicals and then they become disenchanted and now they're fundamentalist. They're it's the same spirit but now they're deconstructionists or they're liberal whatever, but they didn't, nothing changed.
Right. And now so this I agree 100%. This is what I think is happening with anti-woke people right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's my big fear is that a lot of the people in the circles that we run in are just going to see all this social justice warrior woke ridiculousness and then they are going to be woke
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to go nowhere and we will have another I mean, it won't happen, but like there are times when I think, and I'm not like saying I've had a vision, but there are times in my intuition where I feel like there's a big bloody time coming, and and I mean, and I can play out like I say this sometimes, like I play out scenarios where I think this happens because when people start to like just theoretically, let's make this very concrete for a while. Like I think this is a very possible thing to happen. So America is kind of the epicenter of what's going on right now in the world, particularly Minneapolis, my home turf.
Oh yeah, you're right there.
Uh-huh. And um, and um, I think what's very likely to happen, and I agree with you about this spirit, the same mimetic spirit of rivalry and mimetic desire and violence, because it's all rooted in control. It's all the same spirit.
Yep.
This is which is this is what I've been trying to do is name that spirit. Like instead of people just pointing, seeing instantiations and being able to point to all the different instantiations, I'm like, great, what's underneath that?
Yeah.
Like until we figure out what's underneath that, we're just saying like here, 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 cool.
Right.
So what I think is very likely to happen is, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not a prophet or a son of a prophet necessarily, but I think that um, this fall, this election, I mean, I think it's going to be bad no matter what happens. But I honestly think what I think is likely to happen is I think the majority of Americans actually are not the the very vocal minority right now, whether it's through social media or the news or whatever. I think most of America is um, more more on the side of Donald Trump than not,
Yeah.
and and because we live in a two-party system world, and really, I mean, Trump's a little bit. I don't know. Trump isn't really a traditional. He's a little bit of a different thing, although he still supports corporatism essentially, which they're both the Republicans and Democrats do, just in different ways.
Right.
But I think it's largely possible that Trump wins the election, and then um, I feel like there's some kind of a I don't know, I can see all these scenarios, but if he doesn't, basically I can see some kind of a insurgence happening depending on which side wins, because the state essentially in politics is like our God and Savior. When you listen to all these
Yeah.
conversations like Douglas Murray and Rogan, like Rogan keeps saying, like, I don't know, what do we do? I don't know what to do. Like, it's kind of like what you were saying. It's like, why did World War I and World War II happen? It was all these
Yeah.
rational, enlightened people. And
Yep.
that's what Rogan says all the time. He's just like, we're so, like, why is this happening? Like, we're just, people aren't, like, why aren't people being reasonable?
Right.
And then the answer will be like, well, what do we do? What do we educate? Okay. Right. And why isn't education working? Oh, we need to throw more money at it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. You know how much people spend per student on public education? A lot.
Right.
Um, and it gets worse the more they spend. So um, I think what could likely happen is we're so divided and so tribal, is that whoever wins, there could be like an actual kind of revolutionary resurgence. And
Yeah.
I think it could move to the point of like actual war, like third
Oh
world
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, and it follows that whole Girardian mimetic rivalry, because the Democrats and Republicans are exactly the same in
Yeah.
this in their spirit, in the Girardian sense. They're mimicking each other.
Conservative, progressive evangelicals.
Yeah, and even you can see, yeah. So you can't pick a side. You have to like literally find a different spirit to imitate. Because that's another thing about Gerard that like struck me. It was like, because I always have this idea that I'm somehow, like, I know that I admire people, but somehow I have this idea that I'm making decisions on my own. And 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 so just the idea, like, no, I'm imitating people. I'm imitating other people that I see, and it's an amalgam of this person, that person, and this is unconscious, and this is conscious, and it's all, it's not just straightforward. And this one I'm acting the opposite, and this one I'm acting, I'm trying to be similar,
I would say
but
it's one of those both end things. Like you
right,
are acting, but in the spirit of something else because you have to.
yeah, because part of what we're doing here is we're imitating the spirit of Paul Vanderklay, like
Mm-hmm.
in a weird way.
Oh, for sure.
And part of that is imitating the spirit of Jordan Peterson, and part of that is imitating the spirit of Jung and
Let me
Soul
bring this in.
Medicine, and like,
You know who Rupert Sheldrake is?
uh,
He's one of my other guys in my Mount Rushmore. I got Paul. I
who's
got
on
Van.
your Mount Rushmore?
I don't. It's hard to. So like,
It's like 50 faces.
a lot of them. So like it would be Gerard is up there. Sheldrake is up there.
Anyway,
Jordan.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so more. So Rupert Sheldrake has this theory. He made up this theory called morphic resonance, and it's about morphic fields. And he's actually still living. He's like one of my dream people for Peterson to talk to, and they've been like he's been on Rebel Wisdom, if you know Rebel Wisdom.
yeah.
He's been on Rogan's podcast a couple times
I
actually.
may have seen an interview with him. I just can't
Um,
place him.
he's so awesome. But his theory of morphic resonance is basically the idea. He started off. He's a biologist, and he also has his PhD in the philosophy of science. So like he really understands philosophy too. Um, but he was studying plants, and he really got to studying form, and like, and there's no way to be able to articulate why a plant um, or animals for that matter take the form. We can't come up with any sort of scientific mechanism to understand why they take the forms that they do and how all that works. And he basically came up with this theory that there are there are fields which he calls morphic fields. Like morph is form, Greek.
Mm-hmm.
There are fields of forms that everything participates in that are transcendent of space and time,
Yeah.
that things participate in, and they mimic. So it's mimesis too,
Right.
form
That's interesting.
through these fields. You could think of it as like a magnetic field. So like it's nothing that can be it can't be traced or perceived materially. It's almost a it's an amalgamation of like spirituality and science in a way. And
Yeah.
they've done all these studies where like they teach, one of the famous ones is they teach rats how to travel through these mazes, and they teach them ways to do it. And what's so crazy is that like you can take rats on one side of the globe, and then they took rats of the same species, completely divorced of them
Oh, I
genetically,
heard about that.
location, and
Yeah.
everything. And then they taught all these how to do it, and then the rats on the other side of the globe got better. They got faster at the
No,
same.
they taught the rats. Then they brought all the rats together. They didn't run the maze, and then they took the new rats, put them in the maze, and they could run the maze faster than they just had to be around the other rats.
I think no, I think they kept them completely separate,
Oh,
which is
really?
yeah, which is the whole point of
That's even freakier.
which is the whole point of the study, because it's his whole the point of it is to prove that these things work outside of space causal connection.
Really?
Not about genetics, and it's not about proximity. It's about the same
Yeah.
similar morphic pattern.
Well, then,
Crystals do that too. Like if you form a crystal for the first time ever, the formation, once you've formed a crystal that's never been formed before, gets faster and faster over time, and it works out, anywhere in the world
it's
separately.
interesting. That's also a phenomenon you see in extreme sports where,
Yep.
where like someone will do the first 900, and then after that, 3 months later, four other people did it
Right.
or whatever it is.
Right.
So this gets to an idea that like, so if we're trying to participate in a different spirit, then you need to be around people and facilitate that, because
Well,
like
how do you
it's not,
participate in that form? How do you participate in that matter, that morphe, that
you
pattern?
surround yourself with it. So like it has to do with the company you keep and the conversations you have. But it's also, it's not something that you rationally can make yourself do. Like if I started right now, let's say I moved uh, into a house with four other guys and they're all weightlifters. The chance, like I would probably easily be able to convince myself that getting up at 4 a.m. and going to the gym every day and working out is something that I want to do.
Yeah.
And and just being around those people. And as soon as I leave that situation, I'm not as motivated to do that. It's stuff like that. So it's even like, so you talked about like, so Peterson, there's a certain spirit about Peterson. Getting really like the cult of Peterson. But there's a certain spirit that you said, and I'm really talking about like some of this, like we're imitating each other, we're watching what each other's doing. Because I had a couple friends that as soon as I found Peterson, I wanted to talk to them about it because they're my friends from when I was, uh, a teenager and in ministry and stuff. And since then, they've gone their own way. And one of them's not a Christian, and one of them's kind of, nominal or liberal-ish. Who knows?
Yeah.
But so I'm like, I told them about Peterson. I was like, this is incredible. You got to hear what this guy's saying. And they were like, are you insane? Peterson is literally a Nazi. And they're not joking. And I was like, look, I don't care about the politics. And they just saw that his politics was just a sign that basically he's this Nazi guy. And I could never describe to him exactly what it was. I tried talking him through some of the arguments from like, where does religion come from an evolutionary standpoint, the psychology of Genesis, all these things that were just like blowing my mind. But I could never articulate it to him because it was all something that Peterson was doing. I could sense it. I could sense what he was doing. He's bringing things together. He's like, and and he's doing it.
So
But
here's what I
I
think is
liked his spirit. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is I like his spirit more than I liked his arguments. I'm
right.
discovering, and
Right.
I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to bring things together. I want to be able to think about things in that kind of way. And um, yeah, how do we, I guess,
So it's the same thing with Paul, I would say. It's the same thing with
mm-hmm,
this is like what Peugeot says. So here's the thing about it that we this thing, if it's universal and if it's reflective of the logos, um, then then it has to scale, right? It has to work at every level. So it can't be merely propositionable and articulated, and like this kind of conversation that we're having, it can't be something so just complicated and philosophical and obtuse that
yeah,
like that certain people can't do it. Like it can't be IQ dependent. Again, that's
yeah,
in the modernist frame. That's in the rational frame. Like people just have to be more reasonable and understand the right facts and information.
right.
That's not it. It has to be something transcendent and bigger than that.
Like a spirit.
It has to be a spirit, but and something that someone can participate in. But this is where like a simple like and I don't even mean this like in a negative way. It sounds negative because we so idolize the intellect, but
Yeah,
like a simpleton could participate in the logos and participate in the spirit that we're talking about with
yep,
Peterson. That some, and this is why like some of the smartest people in the world that can articulate things that very few people can understand cannot participate in the same spirit
yep,
because it's not contingent on the intellect,
yep,
contingent upon love,
yep,
humility, grace, charity, steel manning people. Like this is what Paul models when he talks to randos. I watch conversations with Paul where like I feel like I know Paul well enough from watching him so much, and Paul's smart where I feel like I'm inside his head. Like I feel like I
mm-hmm,
know what he's thinking, and then I feel like I know how he navigates that and what
yeah,
he's
yeah,
doing. And I'm just like, he's so damn good at it.
yep,
And it's loving. He never does it in a condescending, um, negatively paternalistic way. He like
mm-hmm,
never or rarely, if ever, does that that I've seen. And like that's the kind of thing that I'm doing. I think the reason Peterson blew up so much is that Peterson is able. I mean, he's got a weird temperament. So like if you piss him off, he'll fight with you. But
yeah. Some
but
people latched onto that part of him.
right. But he'll have those kinds of
Yeah,
conversations. But he's also able to art. But he's also smarter than everyone else. So he's
yeah,
able to articulate and bring in psychological and mystical and philosophical and science, but in a way that isn't static and reductionistic. It's not that language as a manipulative tool. It's
yep,
language as an opening up into a transcendence that's ineffable. He knows that fundamentally, and
mm-hmm,
that's why I say he's a mystic.
yeah,
But I don't know. I'm constantly afraid of rationalists. Like my arch nemesis are rationalists. They drive me crazy.
yeah. I always try to have conversations with them, and it, like, I think I'm doing well, but they're just like, "What are you talking about?"
Uh, well, and even your friends, like what you were saying, when you talk to them about Peterson, the spirit that I would say people who participate that people participate in that quickly and smugly treat people like who says that says like if you treat someone like a static thing, like a static image, like if you don't treat them as if they have unknown dynamics about them. Like if you treat them that like, oh, all my ideas about you are you, if you treat
Mm-hmm.
them that way, they're not gonna like you.
Right.
Like they'll get very frustrated with you, and you'll learn that with your kids and your marriage, whatever.
Yeah.
Which is why it all comes back to the family, I think. Like if you this is why I try to tell people like you don't talk I know you don't talk to your wife this way. You can't because you'd be divorced, or you'd want to kill each other.
Yeah, it should kill you.
Right. And that's what we need to embody, I think, is like familial dialogue.
Well, I know, like during this whole COVID thing, like the one thing that like I feel society fringing, at the fringes, and everything's kind of separating, and everything's divisive, and we can't go to church really, and our church community can't meet the way we used to, and so like everything's separate except the family right now.
Mm.
And I'm just like, and we, through this time, like we just sort of strengthened that. We just sort of like, I put in work in the backyard to make it nice to hang out in while
Yeah.
we're all at home,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then we can't go out, and we can't necessarily distract ourselves with a million things, and we don't have anything to do. So you know, we watch TV together, we play games together. We did like all this stuff. And my boys loved it. Like they don't know, like this has been like the least it's been the least traumatizing time in their life. They never want to go back to school. They're like, and so like, I know that my experience isn't everyone's experience. Some people are having a hard time, and it's not like their fault or anything. And I'm not trying to say that like somehow I'm doing some amazing job or whatever, but I just I just see that, like, I agree with you. Like there's something about how a family runs. And even Jonathan Pajot said about this, like if reality is like this sort of fractal structure, like everything needs to operate in the same way. Like that's how
Mm.
symbolism works. So the family works in a certain way. Parents, kids below, parents, love keeping them together. And then you
Right.
have the greater community, maybe it's a church or whatever. And then you have the city, and there's a mayor on top of the city, and there's different people at the school district and other places. And you know these are all kind of like small hierarchies all stacked within each other, and everything, the proper way to keep it all together is love. And anytime that either, modernism, he says, basically tries to flatten the whole thing. So you have basically the person at the top with a few people, and then everyone else, try to make everything equal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, um, but yeah, I think there's just a lot of stuff I've learned about the family, and how it works. And yeah, just to echo what you're saying, like it's all love. Like if you we got to figure out how, because love, Jonathan Pajot also said, love is what keeps things together and distinct. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like a smashing together where everything's the same now, and it keeps things from being separated and everything just flying apart.
Right. Well, and that's where you could bring in, because I think it's symbolically the same thing. The and it's not just the metaphor, but the symbolic reality and universality of the spirit that's reflected in the body. It's the
Mm-hmm.
body and the members. Not everything is the same, but when the body is healthy, all of those things are working in harmony, doing the things that they do. Are they all equal? I mean, I mean, depends on what you mean. Like,
The
you got
hand will sometimes sacrifice itself for the head.
right. And you need, like, there are parts like the head and the heart are important. Obviously they're important. But and I think the point that you because the point that you're bringing up about love, that it doesn't squelch, it's unity and multiplicity. That's what
Yep.
it is. Different, but unity, but one thing. Not the same,
Mm-hmm.
but one.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why it's reflective, why I would say it's reflective of Trinitarian theology, is that your family works that way, your body works that way. They are not all the same, but they are one thing. You could think of it, I mean, people tend to think of it as like a macro organism or something, and that's even like pantheists will say like the giant macro organism is God. And I mean, there's some aspects of truth in that, but like love is the, if every, I see like the spirit of identitarianism that says like in order for me to accept you or affirm you or be like you, everything has to be the same. Like that squelch it, that actually destroys love, because then everything's just the same. And if
Yeah,
everything,
or it has to be reversed to what they say. So like if white supremacy is the issue, then we're going to reverse it and have whites down here and people of color up here.
right,
Um, that's not. It's not. It may be just. That's the thing, is that, like, if justice is your highest goal instead of love, then maybe that is what you do, or that is what you do. You flip hierarchies, you oppress the oppressor, you do all that stuff. But in love, you can't necessarily do that, because you got to work together. You have to.
Right. So then this is Jeff and I, and he wasn't able to join us, whatever, but Jeff and I, Jeff consistently has this impulse, and I think it's right, and me and him talk a lot about this. So then what you're saying right there, though, is love does not squelch diversity, and it doesn't just, like 1 Corinthians 13, love does not insist on its own way, you know? People would do well, all of us, to just read 1 Corinthians 13 every day. I mean, it's such an amazing thing. But so right now, being that I said this earlier, and this is my fear, that you have this new woke identitarianism that's trying to squelch diversity and say everything must come under this new thing. But now we're having this anti-woke awakening to just be like, that's a bad thing, and a bunch of people are going to get on that bandwagon. Well, then they're going to squelch that thing. And this is where Jeff and I will often have this kind of a question and ask this kind of thing, because it can become really easy to be tribal and gang up on someone. So someone who is, because Jeff even invited one of his friends once to the Discord, who was talking about things like the patriarchy and whatever. And I mean, and to their credit, I mean, they stuck around for quite a while. Like, they just got throttled. But I think the loving response is to try to say, like, not everyone, like, you can't just automatically scapegoat them and demonize them and say they're 100% wrong in this static way, in a Girardian way.
Yeah.
To demonize them, because they're not 100% wrong. Like,
Yeah, the people that want justice are right.
right, and
There needs to be some sort of justice.
Right, and they're maybe not 100% right, but like, to say like they're completely self-deceived and completely inauthentic and completely lying is to treat them like the static thing that you can't, and that's not interacting with them in love. So then I think one thing I would like our kind of community to do, and we're pretty good at it, but I think one way that I'd like us to be better is like take the group that we disagree with the most and just be like, what are they right about? Because that's the thing, is like, I don't think our group is very good at that at all with like the postmodernists. Like, we talk about all these postmodernists and we're just like, they're all like relativists and veiled Marxists and
playing whatever, hidden power games.
Right. And I'm just like, I don't think that's true. I actually think they have legit things to say. Some of them, at least. Because then again, that's bringing up the fear in me that, like, we're not actually doing dialogos and creating and interacting with this in a healthy kind of a way. We're just doing the late stage modernity controlling power game thing again, and thinking that we're the new anti-woke woke.
Right. The anti woke.
Right. Which is like, you can just keep going down that road, but it's really like the different participation spirit. And I don't know, like, this gets into the estuary stuff, like, and where maybe kind of our first, I don't know how to, here's the thing, is I don't think you can institutionalize it. I really don't think you can, because anytime you do, you bring it down to an abstracted, breathless, divorced, propositional thing, and it has to be embodied to be real.
Yeah, I think what you have to do is you have to provide some sort of framework where that can be a possibility, because you can't legislate that to happen.
A feminine space. This could bring in
yeah, that's the whole.
A feminine space with a masculine words, instead of a masculine space with feminine words.
That's your whole Estuary church thing.
Yeah, and I think, well, because I think that's what Paul has done.
Yeah,
like, I think that's what Paul has done, is created. That's exactly what his channel is. I think, is a feminine space, a non-judgmental space that has no boundaries of like, you have to be this to be here. You can be anybody. heretics come in, this person comes. So it's an open space, but then we have real conversations in there where there are judgments and stuff, but hopefully where we're not saying like, but it still leaves room for open and potentiality and growth and movement. Because like if it ever gets to the place where like, oh, we're only feminine up to a point, and that's really like a bait and switch game where like we'll exclude you if you don't eventually get on the right team, because that's largely what I think churches have done in my experience.
Yep.
It's not really a feminine space. It's a pretend feminine space just to convert you to my team.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know what are the borders? What is the framing to make that space?
I don't know. I think you gotta, I don't know. I see Andrea doing this really well, like on Twitter and through her videos and stuff, because she basically just kind of asks questions.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can just be as basic as that and even Paul talked about how when he started his group, he's like, I ask people to tell their story. Like, how open-ended is that? Like, basically the borders are like, you tell your story. Like, don't tell me about some ideas that someone else had. Like, tell your story.
Yeah.
And that will provide a way. And then like, if we're asking questions about something, because you can ask a question, the question directs, but it also is open-ended, so they can say whatever they want.
That's the feminine, right?
Yeah.
Question frames, because it's a question, like you can't just go anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's not it's not like controlling and rhetorical.
Yeah, it's saying Jesus, they're out of wine. What are you going to do about it? It doesn't say, hey Jesus, go and do this and this and this and get the jars and perform the miracle. It says they're out of wine, Jesus. What's up? Yeah. So I think that's kind of, I don't know, that's how I think about it. Like if we're creating a space, I'm gonna start one here. I've already talked to like my pastor a bunch and a couple guys, and see how it goes. Because there's a couple guys that are already in like the men's group that I meet with that they're so open. They just talk, and so it would be I think it'd be a fine place to.
What do you do? Well, that's great. I mean, and I guess the only thing you can do is model it to some degree.
Yeah, I think it's the thing. Like you have to participate in the spirit, and then people will mimic it.
What do you do when somebody comes in and tries to dominate and make it a masculine space where it's just all about everyone becoming them in a replicative machine identity?
Well, that's where you have to have some sort of rules. Like you can tell when someone comes into a room and like they're not participating in the correct way. They're not playing the same game. They're like, I don't think that's true. I think when Jesus said that, it's pretty plain that this is what he meant. And then all of a sudden, all the air's out of the room, and like the conversation shut down. You're just like, I think there's techniques to turn that around.
Think about that symbolically. What you just said took all the air out of the room.
Mm-hmm. It collapsed the space.
Spirit, air, breath.
Well, I think as like someone, if you're leading the group, you got to be able to then open it back up.
Yeah.
And you have to be very intentional because being feminine isn't passive.
No.
So like as soon as someone comes in and is like, you got to be like, I don't know what the thing is. You somehow ask another question, try to get some more, kick them out of the group. Like, those are all possibilities.
Right. And I suppose it just depends on, you could talk to them afterwards and just be like, listen, the goal for this is not to be a colonizing space where you just make a bunch of little like acolytes.
Yeah. And even next time, ask them to tell their story, because they got a story, and it'll probably have some interesting points that would be really helpful to hear,
See, because that's where everything gets real. Like that's when you keep everything in the idea of like ideas and isms and stuff. It's kind of like that. You're regurgitating somebody else's ideas, and everything is divorced from your being. Really,
you get them back into their own consciousness instead of someone else's consciousness.
Right. No, for sure. And then then you're participating, I think, really in the logos when someone tells their story. Like, that's kind of the brilliance, I think, of what Paul has done. I don't know if he's ever put language on that. But when you get someone to tell their story, because it's their story, it's it's inherently real. It has to,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a participation in that transcendent thing, because it's not a you can't ever be in that space when you're just telling your story. You can't use that and manipulate it. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not trying to convert someone. It's your story,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah,
uh,
and that was always my favorite part. Like, we'd go to a new church or something, become a part of a new small group. Like, everyone introduce yourselves. Tell us about yourself. That was always my favorite part. Sometimes it would last like 2 or 3 of the first meetings would be just introductions and talking about yourself and what your story is, and you get to hear everyone else's story. And then like as soon as they're like, all right, here's the agenda for the curriculum for the rest of the year, and then I'm just like, I'm like, I participate and I try to, like, use the, like, as I'm in the discussions, like, use whatever book that we're talking about as a jumping off point.
right.
Man, like, some of those, they just get, all right, what did we learn today? The first point we learned is,
And
you
you get
know,
to the Sunday school answer where people are just parroting ideas that aren't their own, and we're. But that's what's so crazy to me. That has your experience is exactly mine, and that's always been my frustration in church. Is like, because I would say symbolically, spiritually, what you're doing when you do that is you're taking yourself out of a participation in the transcendent logos spirit, that initial thing that was making
mm-hmm,
you excited, and you're moving over into the spirit of like ideology and abstracted regurgitation of other people's ideas,
yep,
which is dead and lifeless,
yep,
no matter how well intended it is. And that's how, and churches are just like, that's what we have decided institutionally is our structure and how we're going to make disciples.
yeah, because we have to get the right knowledge in their head so they can be saved.
And everyone knew it. Like, that's the thing, is like everybody, I could look around a room. I had this exact same experiences with you. I could look around a room while we were doing it, and I could read I'm a fairly empathic, relational person. I could read everybody's faces, and they're all just like
Zoned out.
zoned out or thinking this is dead or frustrated or whatever. And then I just kept being like, why are we doing this?
No one wants to be here.
And then this is essentially, I don't know if you've heard my story, but this is essentially why I left evangelicalism, is because I was in this over and over and over. And then I'd meet with my small group leader, and I'd meet with the pastor, and I'd try to have this conversation, just be like, I know why you think you're doing this, and I know why you think it's a good idea, but I
Mhm.
don't think it, I didn't have the kind of articulation that I have now to be able to say what I think is going on, and I wouldn't have probably had the time to be able to bring them up to speed. I mean, that's often how I feel, is like I've been just like I've been like laser focused on this for 2 years, thinking about it, coming up with language, reading things. I am like essentially a chasm away from you, and I have no idea how to get you here. I have no idea how to get you
Yeah, then you try to do it real quick in like 45 minutes, and they're like, oh, Luke again with all his,
with
I
this
can't handle him.
verbal waterboarding. Yeah. Yeah, and then I'm excitable, and it's worse. Yeah, that's I don't I it's a it was always a frustration to me, and then I was trying to figure out, like, that's what led me to all of to Paul, to Jordan Peterson, to all of this language, technological babble, egoic intellect, is I'm trying to, like, that exact church experience, I was trying to name the spirit of it.
Right.
That's what I've been trying to do. It's like, what is that? Everybody knows it's dumb. That's there. They don't know it consciously, but I can see that they don't like it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I know in this room is that 5, 10, 20 years down the road, a bunch of these people are going to deconstruct and be post-evangelical or leave the church or be agnostic or whatever. And I'm just like, I don't want to just sit here and wait for that to happen passively.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's why. Well, that's the whole reason why the estuary caught my attention. It was like I was like, I could do that, and it would open up this space not only for myself but also for anybody else going through this, outside or inside the church. You know, I
There, man.
I don't know how to market it, but we'll figure that out.
Well, that's the tough part because that's Paul started with just the Jordan Peterson meetup. I mean, that was the thing. Like it was. I mean, that's somewhat how icons work too, right? And
Hmm.
symbolic vision works is like Jordan Peterson meetup. Like that was the bat signal, and all the people that knew what that meant or like had that spirit, had experienced that spirit,
Right, right.
just like boom. So like, what is your bat signal to send out that people could see? Like, because that's the thing. Everything is co-opted. Like you could say like honest, authentic conversations or like because that's the kind of thing I see is like I go around town, I see
Yeah.
signs like street sign or people put in their yard, it'll say like love wins. And like I know what that means. Like that just means
You know that they hate conservatives.
that yeah, that means I hate conservatives and I'm affirming of LGBTQ.
Right, right.
Like but it's a bat signal for that, So like what is your
I don't know. Because I don't want to start a Jordan Peterson group. I don't want to have that label over me.
well it's
I,
become it's got negative baggage with some people, right?
yeah, and although like maybe it participates in the type of that spirit, but he's not like necessarily the owner of that. And so how do you break that away from him and get it into a realm where people just like, oh, I like that idea. I want to go talk about stuff.
Well we should I'm gonna have to wrap this up because my kids are gonna be coming home. But
Yeah.
also we should if anybody watches this from Discord or randos or whoever,
Calling all randos, calling all randos.
that's right. Come up with good marketing names for a bat signal that that can that gives the bat signal to embody that spirit of a participation in an uncontrolling dialogue of
Feminine space.
love, feminine space of love.
What can we use as a signal or a symbol for feminine space?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, man. It's because that's the thing. Like you just I mean, the Theotokos, the Mother of God, is the most iconic one, quite literally. But yet, you do that,
Yeah.
and you'll just get Catholic and Orthodox.
Yeah. Or yeah.
That's the problem. Is like it's all that identitarianism. Like what is a transcendent? Or if you put like some like Gaia symbol, you just get all the
I know,
new
right?
people. Um, which and that's the thing is like the people that you and I think are looking for are within all those groups.
Yeah, but you have to do something which is in common but dodges all the narrow.
Right. It's a hard thing to think about. That's why we got to crowdsource it.
All right, calling all randos, calling all randos.
All right.
All right, we'll call this one good.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.